Let's look at number 8. Which of the following most logically completes the argument? So let's read the paragraph, see if we can predict what would logically follow from this. So it says some anthropologists are claiming that cultures can most effectively respond to the threat of cultural decay by replacing or letting go of a lot of their traditions so that other traditions can endure. But since each of its traditions is actually essential to a culture's identity, this strategy, what? Well, let's think about it. Let's put everything together so far. Sentence 1 told us that there's this strategy that says they should get rid of a bunch of their traditions, right? That cultures should do that. They should they should replace or abandon a bunch of their traditions. But then it says, but each of the traditions are essential to the culture's identity. So therefore, this strategy will accomplish what? Well, it will mess up the culture's identity. That we know, right? That would be a logical conclusion here because, right? It says since each of its traditions is essential to the culture's identity, so what is this strategy doing? This strategy is getting rid of something that's essential to its own identity, right? This culture that follows this strategy is getting rid of something that's essential to its identity. So in other words, that's another way of saying this strategy will kill the culture's identity, right? If you get rid of something that's essential to your identity as a culture, then that means you just lost something that's essential to your identity, so you lost your identity. So that's kind of the inference that we're looking for here. That would make the most sense here, right? This strategy would get rid of, would somehow kill the identity of the culture. That's what we want to look for in the answer choices. Let's see if we can find that. A, would this strategy save the cultures that are capable of reflecting on their customs? I don't see why it would save any cultures, right? We just read the paragraph and it doesn't seem like the strategy would be good. According to the paragraph, the strategy would be really bad for the culture's identity because it's getting rid of, it's replacing or abandoning something that is essential to the culture's identity. So it's not going to save the cultures. In fact, it's going to kill the culture's identity. So sort of the opposite of A. B tells us that this strategy will actually ensure the elimination of a culture rather than save it. That's exactly what we were looking for, right? Because if you get rid of something that's essential to the culture's identity, well, that's another way of saying you're eliminating that culture, right? If you get rid of something that you need, well, then you're killing the thing off, right? If the culture's identity needs this thing, it's essential, and you get rid of that essential component, then that culture's identity can no longer survive, right? So B is exactly what we were looking for, and therefore is the correct answer. C, would it be logical to say that this strategy can be implemented by all and only those cultures that are studied by anthropologists? Now, this doesn't really seem to make sense because who's to say who can or cannot implement this strategy? Any culture conceivably could implement this strategy. The question is, will it work or not, right? So that's the conclusion that we're looking for. That's what we know we can prove from this paragraph is that no, this strategy will not work. So it's not about whether they can or cannot implement it. It's that if they do implement it, it will totally kill their culture's identity because it's removing something that's essential to their identity, right? So it's not about whether they can or cannot implement it. Sure, why would they be unable to implement it or able to implement it, right? C doesn't really make sense. Why would it only be that only those cultures can implement it, but other cultures can't? Why wouldn't any culture be able to implement this strategy, right? If they want to. The question is, what will be the result of implementing the strategy? And that's the conclusion we're looking for, is that it's going to be a bad result. It's going to totally eliminate the identity of the culture. So that's more what we're looking for. C doesn't really make sense. D tells us that this strategy is a good thing. In fact, not only is it a good thing, it's the most effective response to the threat of cultural decay. That seems to be backwards. That's not what this sociologist thinks, because this sociologist, in the first half of the sentence that we're completing, just said that the traditions that this strategy would abandon or replace are essential to the culture's identity. So, in other words, that's another way of saying that this strategy is bad. It's going to eliminate the culture's identity. It's not going to save it, right? So D is backwards. It contradicts with the information given. E says that this strategy can succeed. Now, already from the first two words, I'm very suspicious, right? Because the evidence in the paragraph is that this strategy is a very bad idea, right? But E says it can succeed if it's adopted by cultures whose traditions have only been adopted recently as opposed to a long time ago. Why would that be the case, right? That doesn't sound like that's true. According to the paragraph, all the traditions that a culture has, right? It says each of a culture's traditions is essential to that culture's identity. It doesn't distinguish between whether those traditions have been adopted recently versus a long time ago. No. It says all the cultures of a tradition are essential to the identity, which means if you apply this strategy, you are getting rid of something that's essential to your identity as a culture. So that's not going to succeed. That's going to do the opposite of what you're trying to do. It's not going to prevent cultural decay. It's going to cause cultural decay. So there's no evidence that this could succeed in any situation. At least from this paragraph, it sounds like it's always going to fail. It's never going to succeed. So therefore, E does not make sense. It's certainly not the right answer. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe. And for thousands more clear LSAT explanation videos, go to masterlsat.com.